Hello everyone, welcome back to a closer look at Queen's studio albums. My name is Adam, and in today's episode we're going to be taking a look at Queen's 12th studio album, A Kinda Magic, released June 1986 globally on CD, tape and vinyl record. And we're going to be comparing the formats of the vinyl record, the cassette tape, the compact disc and the high definition SACD source. When it was released in 1986, it was mastered by Kevin Metcalf, and there were two sound engineers working on this album alongside Queen. You had David Richards and Reinhold Mack, and we'll get into the sessions in a little bit. But the album's been remastered a few times since its original 1986 release. In 1991, when Disney owned the publication rights in North America for Queen albums, Hollywood Records got Eddie Schreier to remaster the album for a release in North America. And then in 1998, Peter Mew at Abbey Road Studios remastered the album in 24-bit, which got a Japanese mini LP CD release, and then a re-release in 2001 and 2004. And of course, in 2008 or 9, I'm not sure which year, Bob Ludwig remastered the album for a 40th anniversary release in 2011 for Island Records with a 2-disc CD set of the album. So it's had a few, but not as many as earlier albums. Now, the recording sessions of how this album was put together is really interesting, to be honest. They ran from September 1985 all the way to March 1986 with additional mastering in April before the June release. And it was recorded in a very strange way, much like the first Queen album was recorded. It was basically, at the time that the band went to do this album's sessions, they had already recorded One Vision. You know, coming off the back of Live Aid, they had a resurgence of energy to record again. And they went into the studio, and a mini documentary was filmed, about 20 minutes, of them, you know, creating the One Vision track. And they released that as a single in 1985. And then they got some footage of the Highlander movie, 20 minutes preview, and was asked to do the soundtrack like they did for Flash Gordon, which is why we're covering this album after the Flash Gordon one, because it's an interesting comparison, as they're both considered soundtrack albums, but really this one isn't. So they were given the footage, they looked it over, and it really inspired them to do the full soundtrack for the album. And I think they created about 6 different tracks. And once they'd recorded these, and they were all working in studios together to create these tracks, they handed them over to the movie production and kind of went their separate ways. And each member of Queen was very busy in their own personal life of other projects going on. So when it came time then to hone in on the A Kinda Magic sessions, they were recording this album in their kind of like downtime, their free time, kind of like Queen 1. And very rarely were they actually together in the studio recording it like the One Vision documentary shows, where they're all having fun, they're all together. That's not how this album was put together. It was recorded officially, as stated on the record, in 3 studios. You had the Mountain Studios in Montreux, Switzerland, the Musicland Studios in Munich, Germany, and the Townhouse Studios in London, England. But in actual fact, there was 4 more studios used around the world to do additional recordings, background vocals, and incidental orchestral work. But they're not noted on the album. One of them being Abbey Road Studios, Sarum East End, and a couple of others, which I forget the name of. But yeah, they really weren't together. So basically, when they came time now to record the sessions of this album, they kind of knew what they were doing because they had those Highlander tracks already recorded, and they basically took those tracks and expanded them and made them more fuller songs, adding lyrics, verses. And because they obviously had written certain songs individually, they all kind of knew what they had to do to make the fuller track. So what happened is Brian May and Roger Taylor tended to favor working with David Richards, either in Mountain Studios or in Townhouse Studios, whereas Freddie Mercury and John Deacon tended to favor working with Reinhold Mack in either Switzerland, the Munich studios, or in Montreux with the Mountain Studios. And very rarely were they all four together. So the album was kind of put together in moments fleeting each week, and two sound engineers were working on this album, which to me is a direct result for the output sound fidelity on this album, because two sound engineers at the mixing desk and recording all the instrumentation and putting it all together, there's two different styles of work there, and it really does show on this album when you listen to it. It's a very jigsaw piece, patchwork quilt job of an album, and probably why it didn't do too well in the charts of the USA. I think it only got to something like number 13 or 14. In the UK, it did hit number 1, but not for long. It was more loved in the UK than it was in the USA, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of people have this down as a favorite album. And for me, this isn't a review, by the way, but for me, I actually do like this album. But the sound fidelity, which is what this video is all about, isn't as good as the songs themselves. So let's get into the formats here that we've got. Now, for the vinyl record, I actually do have the original vinyl that was released in 1986. The obviously recording was done by David Richards, Reinhold Mack, and it was mastered by Kevin Metcalf and released June 1986. And it's a really interesting listen. On cassette tape, I have a reissue of the original recording. So this actually has got Parlophone on the tape, which means this was reissued in 1992. So it's not the 1986 original release, but it is the original master recording on here from 1986, but just a reissue tape in 1992. And that's what we'll be listening to for the cassette tape. On the CD, I've got the Peter Mew remaster from the 24-bit Abbey Road sessions. It says on here 2001 digital master, so it's the one that was released in Japan, the mini LP. I found my Obies, by the way, so I decided to put them back on all the albums. So that's what we'll be listening to on the compact disc. And on SACD, high definition, is the SACD with a disclaimer now. So sad this is. A few months ago, I was explaining what SACD is, and I happened to use a kind of magic as the example. And as I was taking it out of the case, it cracked. And I was like, and it's such a shame, but it wasn't a big crack. It was only a crack that kind of went in, I don't know if you can see that there, to a little bit, you can't see it, a little bit of like the first song. So I'm thinking, oh, well, maybe this will still play. I can probably still get away with it. And I was going to try it in the DVD player and listen to it. So when I came then to take it out for the listen, it actually cracked the entire way. All the way through now. So this disc is absolutely ruined. It's going to cost me about £150 to £200 to replace this disc. So, yeah. So sad. I'm not going to throw it away, but it's never going to get to play again, sadly. But luckily for me, and I do urge everybody to be doing this as well, I always back up any CD or DVD audio that I buy. I've been doing it for 20 years plus. So every CD that I have bought, I have backed up on the PC. So I do have an ISO file of this backed up, which I was able to stream through my TV to my speaker system and still listen to the SACD at reference level. And turning off the transcoding so it wouldn't alter the files, I was able to still listen to the 24-bit nature of that album. So that's what's representing on the SACD. Now, if it's going to be different to have listened it through my DVD player, which might add additional sound processing, I'll never know. But I did listen to it, and I do have opinions on it. So let's get into them, shall we? Now, first off, I've got to say, the fact that two sound engineers worked on this album, it shows so much, because for formats that have a side A and a side B, like the analog ones of tape and vinyl, it really does show the two sides have two different volume levels. Each song on each side has a different way it was recorded, because some songs have very clear instrumentation and great separation between them, and some don't. Some sound like they've been almost compressed, whereas others are quite open and sound fabulous. Some sound like they're very low in the mix of the volume for the side for which it was recorded to, and there's only a couple that are actually booming, like as loud as you would think. When I played this vinyl record on my reference system, side A was 10 decibels below my analog reference point. So I had to crank it up to 10 more decibels to get it at the right volume level for what I would believe that it should be played at. Obviously, this vinyl record, the cassette tape, and the original CD is how exactly Queen wants you to listen to this album. Any further remasters of this album is a reimagine of somebody else's opinion on how it should sound. The release of the vinyl record, mastered by Kevin Metcalf and sound produced by two different engineers, is the result of what they wanted you to hear. And I gotta say, it's not their finest work. Side A, like I said, 10 decibels too low, below reference level. Side B was 13. It was even lower. The audio reproduction on this vinyl isn't as good as A Night at the Opera recorded almost 10 years previously. Honestly, that Night at the Opera and the game pretty much hit reference level almost. I think the game was like 3 decibels out or something, but this one was way out, and the quality of the sound isn't actually that good when you compare it to A Night at the Opera, which has fantastic audio reproduction on it. This one, it's a little bit muted almost. The drums you hear clearly, you know. The bass, you hear John Deacon's bass guitar, especially in 1 Year of Love or Kind of Magic. If I'm listening though to a drum sample machine, I don't know, but you hear the drums, you hear John's bass. Brian's guitar is kind of all over the place on side A, sometimes coming out of a left or a right, but mainly in the middle. Like Freddie's vocals, which are clear, very nice, separated from the background vocals. The phantom center is there, rock solid, but they don't utilize that left and right separation that much like they do in earlier albums where things are shooting across the sound field. In this, it's pretty much retained in the middle, with only a couple of incidental things hitting either side. Cymbal clashes are perfectly crystal clear. The high-end frequencies are there. The quality state of my record basically being the original, release, isn't actually a mint copy, I'd say, but a copy to be able to listen to without proper interference. It had a few ticks and scratches, kind of like at the beginning, but there was always this level of not hiss but crackle evident on this, probably just because it's so old, and it's been played loads of times. But it didn't really take away from the listening experience, I feel. But side A sounds better than side B. The tracks on side A are a lot stronger than side B in terms of the song choice, but they're all, in terms of, they're all louder. They're all, 1 Year of Love sounds like it's way too loud compared up against like One Vision, which feels like it should be louder, or even Princes of the Universe. 1 Year of Love has a louder sound and a very nice sound recording. Basically, all the songs recorded by Reinhold Mack sound like a Queen album. All the songs recorded by David Richards, which are basically any Brian May or Roger Taylor song, sound like they're too low in volume. The recording separation between the instruments isn't that great. It's a bit muddy. So, like I say, the album's like that in terms of its sound fidelity, all over the shop. But let's have a look at the vinyl record. Side B of the vinyl record as well. Who Wants to Live Forever? I was about to say Who Wants to Be a Millionaire then. Who Wants to Live Forever starts off so low, 13 decibels lower below reference. And so the opening bit of Who Wants to Be Who Wants to Live Forever, honestly, Brian's vocals, the organ he's playing, you can barely hear it. I had to crank it up 13 decibels to hear it, and it still wasn't recorded in great fidelity. In fact, there is a song on here, I think it's Give Me the Prize, where you hear some audio from the film Highlander, and all that audio from the film is much louder and recorded a lot better than the song itself. Give Me the Prize, man. Kurgan's theme, yeah. Wasn't recorded well, I'd say. It's a Brian May song. So David Richards, first time working with Queen at the mixing desk, probably not his best work. That's the insert there you get, and that's what the vinyl looks like. So Give Me the Prize sounds like it should have been louder. It's not as pumping or as clear as all the other songs are. So Give Me the Prize sounds like it could have been boosted by a few decibels to really hit hard, because it's a proper rock song, And there's a line in it when Clancy Brown's character says, "It's better to burn hell than fade away." It's better to burn hell it's better to burn in hell than fade away. That's the line in the song. Better to burn in hell than fade away. When I listened to it on the vinyl record, I thought he said, it's better to burn in hell in the famed way. Because the audio reproduction isn't that great on this album. I honestly thought he said in the famed way, as in, rather than fade away. And it's like that for all the analog versions, by the way. It's only the SACD which is proper clear. Like, you can hear it on the CD, but it's even more clearer on the SACD. That's the inner artwork. The artwork was done by some guy named Chisholm, sorry. I forget his first name. Really sorry, mate. I'm sure it says it in here. But, yeah. It's... I like I said, I really like this album. I love the cartoon characters, Ironically, this is before Disney took them over. So if Disney had, published this album, I'm sure the artwork would have been different. But yeah, obviously a few music videos got released, but that's nothing to do with this video. We'll go through the music videos in a separate series. But that's the vinyl record. The mastering on this vinyl record is very poor, I'd say. The highs are high, the bass ain't rumbling, In fact, it honestly sounds like a drum machine was used on the drums. There's a lot of synth work on here, but it's done very well. It's not over bearing like Flash Gordon was, but it's very well mixed into all Queen's instrumentation. Freddie's vocals are recorded adequately, but not. I mean, I've heard him a lot better, especially like on The Game. That makes him sound like he's on The Game. No, on the album The Game, his vocals, or even A Night at the Opera, his vocals were recorded very nicely. On here, it's like, and it's a mid-80s album, let's not forget. It's a classic mid-80s album, and, you'd think that the quality of this would far exceed, say, A Night at the Opera or The Game, where it's many years later, the equipment has changed, they're still recording on, 2-inch reel-to-reel tape, but you'd think with the technology still, advancing, this would have a better sound output, but it just doesn't. It leaves you wanting more from it. Now, if you crank it all up and you don't have a reference level set, you'll probably say that this album sounds absolutely fine. But the only way I can decipher if an album is mastered too hot or too low, or if the recording has been shite, is have a reference level set to how the album should be played at. And this is way below that reference level, sadly. But what about the cassette tape, the next analog source? Very interesting. So this is a 1992 release from the 1986 master. So by all accounts, it's exactly the same that was on the 1986 cassette tape, only it's just been reissued. When you open it up, you have the tape there, which I know my camera's not going to be able to pick up because it's shite, like the recording of this album. Like I said, I do enjoy this album, and when I do the album review, you'll hear why and probably disagree with me. That's the artwork there for the album. It's basically exactly the same as the vinyl record, but on the spine it says XDR quality system, and again, you're not going to be able to see this, but here a brief description of what XDR is. Basically, it's a sound recording system where it basically compresses the frequencies into here, and then lets it explode on playback, much like the Dolby X Pro it does. This one basically heightens the headroom to allow more on to the tape, and I would say makes a difference. When I listened to the tape, it was only about 5 decibels below reference, so it was actually louder than the vinyl record. Now obviously cassette tape is more limited than a vinyl record in terms of its dynamic frequency response, but this honestly sounds like a CD for starters. The high frequencies, like the cymbal clashes and any higher notes, are there, and they are crystal clear. Doesn't sound like there is a blanket over the speakers. It is crystal clear in the high end and deeper in bass than the vinyl record. Now, this could be the difference of the fact that I'm playing my vinyls on one device, I'm playing a tape on a different device, and it's how those devices are interpreting what is already there. But there is more bass on this cassette tape than there is on that album of the vinyl record. In fact, there is a louder volume level, so all the songs sound slightly different. And obviously the way tape reproduces sound, the whole album sounds a lot different. It's a lot better to listen to than the vinyl record. This cassette tape sounds like a CD. No tape hiss, no distortion. By the way, no distortion on any of the formats that I heard. The vinyl record was recorded so low, there's no chance of distortion, but obviously the recording that it came from doesn't sound like it was, recorded at a high level and distorted and clipped. It honestly, the actual capturing of all the instrumentation and the vocals must have been done very well. It's just either A, it wasn't recorded at a louder volume, probably to avoid hiss on the tape, or the mastering just got completely screwed the pooch because the output on the vinyl or the output on the tape, you know, could have been better. This makes the album sound like I wish the vinyl had. Now, the vinyl did have a little slightly higher end frequencies for cymbal clashes, you know, and other instruments in the high end of the spectrum than the tape, obviously. But seriously, I was just astonished by this, you know. Vocal, I mean, it sounds identical. Like, in terms of how they've mixed the album, it sounds identical. Like, the way the voice of Freddie against the background vocals and the placement of instruments and the use of the left and right separation and the phantom center, it's exactly the same. But it's just reproduced differently on the tape. It sounds a lot fuller. It sounds like how the vinyl should have been. So, a really nice listen to, and my preference over listening to the vinyl, which I probably will never listen to again, sadly. Moving on to the CD. So, the Peter Mew master. Well, the Peter Mew remaster, really. So, he mastered all the Queen albums in 1998 at Abbey Road into a 24-bit recording digitally. And then he took that recording and remastered it for this CD that was released in 2001, reissued in 2004. So this has a very different sound to it than the tape or the vinyl. Obviously, it's a CD, it has more dynamic range, so a lot more can be packed in. There is the Obi there, for people who care. I don't. There is the front cover, and just like the vinyl record, this is a replication, so you fold it out, you got that there. It's got only one section like the vinyl record where, you know, it hides its good stuff. It has a separate you know, Japanese fold out sheet like they all do, where it has some stuff in English there, but the rest is in Japanese, and I don't speak it, so Google Translate will help you out on that one. Obviously, then you've got the little mini replica, you know, insert, fully replicated. Can't read after that unless you got a magnifying glass. And then you take out the CD if you can, and it's got in an elephant condom. I love these. The replication of the middle spindle from the vinyl record. The sound on this CD was 3 decibels below reference, so not too bad, but, and it sounds identical to what I heard on that tape, to be honest. It sounded very well rounded, highs were clear, separation was good, the mixing of the album didn't really change that much, but it just had a little bit more oomph than the vinyl record, but just about as much oomph as the tape did. But it sounded like there was something missing still. After all that, it sounded like there was something missing. It basically was too clean of a playback. You know, CD doesn't have analog noise from a preamp, you know, or, you know, unless they leave it in, it doesn't have the hiss of the tape format itself. It's only going to have the hiss of whatever was captured in the recording. And of course, this was recorded mainly using, you know, reel-to-reel analog and all that, but with much better Dolby noise reduction than previous albums. So literally on this album, there's no tape hiss whatsoever, not like older albums. So it's a very clean recording, and then obviously the mastering, the output is very, you know, hiss-free. So you don't hear anything like that on this, but it just feels hollow. It feels like this could have more weight to it, or more clarity, or just literally opening up the tracks in terms of how they've placed that sound in the sound field. Basically, the mixing of this album is the the mistake that was made by having two engineers mix the album. You've got two ideas, everything's kind of focused in that phantom center, and nothing, it's only 1 Year of Love is opened up, you know, and Mac works on that song. Other songs don't really have that open feeling. Friends Will Be Friends sounds absolutely fine, you know. It obviously appears on Greatest Hits 2, and it's, you know, a favorite for some people, but I've heard that song on like Laserdisc in an uncompressed state, and, you know, it just sounds okay. It sounds like it was mixed and recorded just adequately. So on the CD, it just has that okay feeling, but it sounds like there is this underneath, you know, phono preamp missing. It's a very clean sound, a very, you know, okay sound, but it sounds like it should be a bit more beefy, especially with tracks like One Vision, Princes of the Universe, which is probably the loudest track on this album. And then every song on the analog formats probably had to compensate dynamically in that volume range to compensate for the loudest signal on that side. So tracks like Who Wants to Live Forever, you know, suffers because, you know, it starts off very quiet, very, you know, modestly, and then it builds up to that chorus at the end. Princes of the Universe reminds me of Freddie's earlier work, to be honest. There's a little bit of an album review there for you. Things like that. Ogre Battle and Princes of the Universe are very similar, I'd say. Anyway, I'll go through it in an album review. Got to crack on with this now. The CD is just okay. It wasn't like, oh wow, I thought I was going to get some really good detail here. It is more clearer than the analog sourced versions, but it's just okay again. It didn't blow me away like I thought it would. You know, like other Peter Mew remasters of other albums. Like, he didn't mess with the album's sonic fidelity or the way it was mixed that much. You know, it was recorded most likely from the master tape of the album mix, the final output that Kevin Metcalf mastered. He then just, you know, tweaked it a little bit to 24-bit and then zipped it to this. So not much was done, you know. He probably thought it's done good enough, but there's a slight whiff of clarity, I would say, over the analog, but that could be just the format. What about the SACD now? Well, like I said, I was streaming it through my TV to my reference system. In terms of reference level, it was only 3 decibels out, just like the CD was. So I didn't have to crank it up that much. But again, you hear everything that is on this album, you know, from the original source. Like, there ain't no place for anything to hide. And this really does show the limitation of the sound mixing. Like, the bass kick drum that you hear from Roger is very cleared and much more detailed on this version than any other version, but it just sounds like it's missing something. Like, the way they recorded instruments has clearly changed from days of like A Night at the Opera, where they had 3 different microphones sampling it, and the bass or the drum kit was bloody, you know, mixed over about 6 different tracks of the 24-track spectrum. This just sounds like a couple of tracks were spared for drums. You know, probably one was a drum machine, you know, on the keyboard, but like, the drums just don't sound like Roger's decent drum kit from the 70s. This sounds a bit flat, you know, making each song not have that weight. John's bass is clearly heard. 1 Year of Love, a kind of magic, and it's very nicely recorded. John's instrument is probably the best recorded on this entire album, and it's really nice. Brian's guitars are adequately recorded, but not done much in the stereo field. It's just kind of there, you know, rocking away. To be honest, I think my overall opinion on the sound reproduction on this album is, this is the one where Queen phoned it in. You know, it was all recorded in their spare time, you know, when they could be bothered. They were working with different engineers. You know, they weren't all together, you know, working on things and putting proper time and effort into it. This was just done on the fly, and, you know, this was their phoned-in album, is my opinion, for the sound fidelity on this album. Because it's just not good, to be honest, compared to previous efforts. It's just about as good, I'd say, as Flash Gordon, you know, except with less noise, less hiss. Like, all the songs are nothing to do with the sound quality of those songs. I love all the songs. Songs are great, but the sound recording of these songs is not. This shows that. Like, what is the best way to listen to this album now? This is the most detailed. You will hear everything. This is more detailed than the cassette tape, you know. This has everything, but it also sounds like it's lacking stuff, you know. It sounds like there should be more to this, you know. The highs are high, the lows are low. Everything's like crammed in the middle. Nothing's really opened up. But you're left wanting more after this. But in this version, you hear Clancy Brown say the line, you know, not fade away, more clearly instead of the famed way in other versions. But my favorite way to listen to A Kind of Magic moving forward from now on is on the cassette tape, because it just sounds fine. No hiss, the bass is good, bit more rumbly than the CD. I will say, like, you know, well, probably just the same, but honestly, obviously I can't listen to this forever. It's going to start wearing out and the highs will drop off and it'll sound like it's muffled, but for now, this is the way I'm going to listen to it, you know. Obviously, I haven't got the Hollywood remaster version, but I can't imagine that sounds much different. Anyway, that is the closer look at Queen's Kind of Magic album for their studio albums collection. In the next episode, I kind of feel like there is a twin album of this, and it ain't Flash Gordon. Because, by the way, I don't consider this a soundtrack album one bit. They recorded completely separate tracks for the Highlander movie, which have never been released except for the A Kind of Magic at the end of the credits for the film was reissued on the Island Records 2-discer here, the Highlander version. That's the only track really that's been issued from what they recorded for the movie. This album is made up of completely different arrangements, so it ain't a soundtrack album. But I feel like a lot of people do think of it as. So that's why I've kind of made it comparable to Flash Gordon. But for me, what is comparable to this is the Sheer Heart Attack album. Because I feel like it was kind of, in terms of its quality, recorded in much the same way. And that's the next album we're going to be taking a look at in the series. So don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified when I release all of these Queen albums. I'm actually working on a lot of Queen content. I'm going to be going through the reviews of all the albums from my own personal point of view. I'm also going to be talking in the future, making videos and discussions about the future of Queen's music, why the Digital Master Series is a thing, and much more Queen content. And one day I'll go through all the Queen shit I've got. But thank you so much for watching this, and join me in the next one when we take a closer look at Queen studio albums. Bye.